Welcome to Week 4, Chapter 4, Supply Chain Relationships. In this week's chapter, we're going to be studying more in depth how important supply chain relationships are to companies and the suppliers. If you remember back in the Introduction to Supply Chain class, we briefly touched on this subject. We talked about the certification systems for the suppliers and different types and why those ratings are very important and why keeping those relationships are very important as well. So let's look at the learning objectives for this week. So first of all, we need to understand the types of supply chain relationships and their importance. We need to describe a process model that will facilitate development and implementation of successful supply chain relationships, and also know just how important collaborative supply chain relationships are. The last couple objectives for this chapter and this week is we need to understand how extensive customers need to be satisfied with 3PL, which stands for third-party relationships, third-party logistics services, and identify where improvement may be needed, and also understand some of the likely future directions for outsourced logistics services. So we're going to begin off by looking at the different types of relationships. There's two types. We got vertical and horizontal. And the vertical, it also refers to the traditional linkages between your firms and your supply chain, like your distributors, your retailers, your manufacturers, and also parts and materials suppliers. Remember when in Introduction to Supply Chain, I talked about, for example, Husqvarna and Missions Plastics. Missions is really not in effect anymore, but Missions Plastic was a supplier for Husqvarna, and at one time they were housed on the same property as Husqvarna. The second types of logistics relationships is horizontal in nature, and it's those business agreements that firms that they have parallel positions, and you know what parallel means, side by side. So the horizontal relationship may be thought of as a service agreement between two or more independent logistic provider firms. So at this point, I gave you one example. You need to think of a couple of companies that in which one that has a vertical relationship and one has a horizontal. You might want to do a Google search or do some kind of research on your own, and you can send me an email and tell me what other companies besides the one I mentioned has these types of relationships. Also, we're going to look at the intensity of involvement. Over in your book in Figure 4-1, there's a range of relationship types that extend from that of a vendor, that of strategic alliance. Remember, we talked about strategic alliances in Introduction to Supply Chain. And in that context, it's more vertical context. The vendor has to be represented by the seller or provider of the product or service, and then there's little or no integration or collaboration. But when you have your strategic alliance, it is when two or more business organizations cooperate with each other and they willingly modify their business objectives and they practice to help achieve long-term goals and achieve their business. When we look at the intensity involvement, there's three different types. You got your transactional, your collaborative, and your strategic. Now, over in your book, in Figure 4-2, there is a model for developing and implementing successful supply chain relationships. A lot of companies feel that there's significant room for improvement in any types of the relationships. So as you look at the intensity involvement, you can see how each one has their benefits for their companies and even their downside. Figure 4-1 is also on this screen, and as you can see, the relationship perspectives. You'll hear arm's length, collaborative, and strategic. We talked a little bit about arm's length, I believe, in the first couple of chapters of the Introduction to Supply Chain. So as you can see, each one goes from one spectrum to the other. The arm's length leads more towards the transactional. The strategic is more towards the relational, and collaborative is right there in the middle. And you've got your three different elements here. You got your vendor, partner, and strategic alliance. Sometimes those relationships differ in a lot of ways. We look at things, as you can see, like duration, cooperation, planning, and goals. That's not an extensive list, but those are the major ways in which relationships can differ between companies and suppliers. This next screen just shows you again the steps that outline a process model for forming and sustaining supply chain relationships. This is also in your textbook. And then we look at this next figure, and it is for a core competency area. So there's 3 different types. So when we look at the core competency areas for these companies, we see their expertise, their ability to invest, and strategic fit. It doesn't have to have a lot of explanation, but you can see again how it's very important that those suppliers meet those relationships, have those core competencies. And we have the model for developing and implementing successful supply chain relationships. So we have to look at a couple of things. Be able to perform strategic assessment. And in that step, you have to make sure you know the process by which the manufacturer becomes fully aware of the logistics and supply chain needs. The second step is your decision to form the relationship, and that depends on your type of relationship, but it takes on slightly different decision context. So there's several drivers. There's like your asset and cost efficiency, your customer service, your marketing advantage, profit stability and growth, and other facilitators. Then you have to evaluate the alternatives. And when you use this methodology, you have to look at parent levels of drivers and facilitators that may suggest the most appropriate type of relationship to consider. Sometimes, if the drivers and facilitators seem to be present, then the recommendation would be for the relationship to be more transactional or more at arm's length. Then you got to select your partners. And it's critical for the customer, but the selection of the logistics or supply chain partner should be made only following very close consideration of the credentials of the most likely candidates. Number 5 is your structure operating model, and that structure of the relationship refers to the activities, processes, and priorities that will be used to build and sustain your relationship. Step 6 was left off, but it's actually in this figure. It's the implementation and the continuous improvement. So as you can see, once your decision to form that relationship has been made, the structural elements are put into place. It's important to recognize that this is the most challenging step in the relationship process. So depending on the complexity of a new relationship, you need to look at the overall implementation process. It has to be relatively short, and it may be extended, or it can be extended sometimes. So as you can see, the figure shows how each step is critical, and we're all going right back to that supply chain value. So companies have to have collaborative relationships with their suppliers. We talk about a little bit about the vertical and collaboration and horizontal. So again, we're going back to vertical and horizontal when it applies to cooperation, and also the full collaboration. So collaboration can be thought of as a benefit for all, as of a business practice which encourages individual organizations to share information and resources. That's a definition. But collaboration also lets companies leverage each other on a more operational basis, so that together they can do better together than they could separately. And so this approach creates a synergistic business environment in which the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, but it's not one that happens naturally overnight. So in most organizations, sometimes, especially with those organizations that have the same operating products or services. So with collaboration, there has to be some things in place. You have to make sure that the parties involved are dynamically sharing and interchange information. The benefits have to be experienced by parties to exceed individual benefits, and all parties had to modify their business practices, and all parties conduct business in a new and visibly different way. So study over the figure on 4-5 of the types of collaboration. And also another thought on the collaboration for the companies, they also have to be, all the parties have to provide a mechanism process for collaboration to occur. So as you all can see, there's different types of collaboration. It shows where the vertical collaboration is, a horizontal collaboration, and full collaboration. So with the vertical collaboration, it is more up or down with suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, and retailers. And then with the horizontal, we see where it goes supplier 1, supplier 2, to manufacturer 1 and 2, distributor 1 and 2, and retailer 1 and 2. So we see how those go. Now with the full collaboration, it looks like it's more or less a combination of the vertical and horizontal collaboration. So when we look at collaboration, there's about 7 laws. So study this table very carefully. We look at the collaborative logistics networks must support real and recognized benefits to all members, dynamic creation, co-buyer and co-supplier relationship, flexibility and security, collaboration across stages of business process integration, and open integration with other sources and collaboration around essential logistics flows. So as we get towards the end of this chapter, we go more into the third-party logistics, 3PL, remember that acronym. And so the definition of third-party logistics is here for you. So when you think about third-party logistics, they can sometimes be external supplier. They perform all part of a company's logistics functions. Remember I talked about Missions Plastics? And among these, there's different logistics activities that go along with the company, and they are integrated or actually managed together, and they also provide solutions to several logistics and supply chain problems of your company. There's different types of 3PL providers listed here, like your transportation, your warehouse, information-based firms, and this was as of 2013 the total NA and global revenues. And you could probably have seen, if you want to go online, you can find some more updated figures. I say, as again, this was circa 2013. So you may want to go online and see if you can find information from 2017 or even 16. Sometimes the years are released backwards. So you might want to just see what you can find. And you can share that with the class if you would like. And Table 4-2 just gives you an overview of the top buyers of 3PL services. You can see some very familiar companies there like General GM and Walmart and Daimler Chrysler, Ford Motor Company, PepsiCo. So you can see how extensive they are. And then Table 4-3 shows you the global 3PL market revenue estimates for the regions, US and Canada and Mexico, and then total North America, as well as the global, Europe and Asia Pacific, Central America, South America, and other countries. And that, of course, was based on year 2010. I think it was published in 2011. So those numbers may have changed significantly. So you can go again and try to look up some updated information, and I will probably try to post in our group a more updated chart for you guys in week 4. Again, we have another figure that shows the 3PL market U.S. turnover growth. Again, as an instructor of Excel, and in addition to supply chain management, charts tell the story. And that's when you're doing things using spreadsheets, and a lot of these charts have been created probably using some kind of spreadsheet software. It tells the story. So you see again how the trends have went over the years. I think it's very interesting to think of it in that perspective. Now, as we go to third-party logistics, research, study, industry details, the last end of the chapter pretty much talks about the research. They talk about the profile of logistics outsourcing, the strategic role of information technology, and management relationship issues. So supply chain research is becoming a big deal. As researchers and universities, including University of Arkansas Fayetteville, they are taking their resources and they are trying to create programs that not just only teach individuals the basics of working in supply chain, but as well researching trends so they can better help companies forecast and also learn how to develop better supply chain relationships. So there's a lot of research out there that you might want to check out. The Journal of Supply Chain Management being one of those. The customer value framework also talks about the 3PLs enable reduced costs, and then a strategic view of the logistics and the roles of 3PLs. Again, another figure of outsourced logistics services. We can see from warehousing to domestic transportation, even to information technology. The customer's perspective, the evolution, next generation logistics outsourcing models. And then as we end, we have learned what the objectives were wanting us to gather. So we got the 2 basic types of supply chain relationships, vertical and horizontal, terms of intensity of involvement, and 6 steps in development and implementation. collaborative relationships, third-party logistics, and several types of 3PLs.